Latest updates with Devin Whiting. Devin?
Hi, Jung-ho. As you say, Donald Trump's letter to Kim Jong-un blamed what he called the North Korean regime's tremendous anger and open hostility. And he said it was a lost opportunity for the world and North Korea in particular, though he didn't rule out holding the talks later and invited Kim Jong-un to call or write him. Park Hee-jun explains.
U.S. President Donald Trump shook the world with a sudden cancellation of the highly anticipated North Korea-U.S. summit that had been set for June 12th in Singapore.
I have decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th. While many things can happen and a great opportunity lies ahead potentially, I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world.
During his statement at the White House Thursday, President Trump said a bright and beautiful future can only happen when the threat of nuclear weapons is removed, and warned Pyongyang that the U.S. is more ready than it has ever been before. Adding the U.S. has support from its allies, including South Korea and Japan, President Trump urged North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to ultimately do what is right for himself and for his people. Stressing that his administration's maximum pressure and sanctions campaign will remain in the meantime, Trump nevertheless left the door open for a future meeting with Kim.
And hopefully everything's going to work out well with North Korea. And a lot of things can happen, including the fact that perhaps, and would wait, it's possible that the existing summit could take place or a summit at some later date. Nobody should be anxious. We have to get it right.
The news was announced earlier in the day in a letter to Kim Jong-un that was released by the White House. President Trump's letter pointed at the tremendous anger and open hostility displayed in North Korea's most recent statement as the reason for the cancellation. This appears to be in relation to remarks made by North Korea's Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Choi Sun-hee. She lashed out at U.S. Vice President Mike Pence for saying the North could end up like Libya if a deal is not reached. Trump concluded the letter saying the world, and North Korea in particular, had lost a great opportunity for lasting peace and prosperity. But he also put the ball back in Pyongyang's court, saying he's always open for talks should Kim Jong-un change his mind. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
North Korea, meanwhile, says it's still willing to hold a summit. Pyongyang's vice foreign minister released a statement a few hours after the meeting was called off by Mr. Trump, and the statement was unusually conciliatory, expressing some respect for the American president's approach hitherto. Oh Jung-hee has this story.
Using very polished and polite diplomatic rhetoric, North Korea urged the United States to give more thought to canceling their June 12 summit. North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Kim Kye-kwan released a statement early Friday morning, roughly 8 hours after the announcement from Washington. He said the North wants to give the U.S. more time and opportunity, meaning Pyongyang is still willing to sit down with Washington for summit talks. Regarding President Trump citing the North's fury and hostility for calling off the summit, Pyongyang claimed that was only because Washington pressed North Korea over unilateral denuclearization. It added the current situation, which shows a very deep rift between the two sides, rather means the summit talks are urgently needed. North Korea did express regret over Trump's decision, but at the same time appealed that the regime has been highly anticipating the summit, as well as what the White House has suggested as a Trump model. It added the regime appreciates President Trump for making a decision that no other American president has, and has been hoping the summit marks a beginning to improving their relations. The statement also said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been pouring his efforts into summit preparations. The North stressed that both sides can't be perfectly satisfied at their first attempt, but if they solve their issues one by one, their relations will only get better, not worse. Pyongyang concluded its statement by saying it's willing to sit down face-to-face with Washington at any time with any format to work through their issues. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
As for South Korea, President Moon Jae-in has expressed his regret that the summit won't be held as scheduled, but he also said that the task of denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and creating a lasting peace cannot be abandoned or delayed. Our Blue House correspondent Moon Gan-young reports.
Baffled and very regretful were the immediate words from South Korean President Moon Jae-in in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's abrupt cancellation of the planned meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Singapore that had been set for June 12. South Korea's presidential Blue House said it had not received any advance notice and was caught off guard Thursday night by the cancellation. In a statement released following an hour-long emergency meeting of its National Security Council at midnight, the South Korean president urged both North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump to resolve the issue through direct dialogue. He said the sensitivity and difficulty of such diplomatic issues call for direct and more close dialogue by the leaders. Current way of communications just will not work. Mr. Trump's cancellation of the Singapore summit comes within 48 hours of Mr. Moon's visit to the White House on Tuesday to solely convince the U.S. president that meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un was still worth it. How and whether this will affect future Seoul-Washington relations, Seoul-Pyongyang relations, and even Pyongyang-Washington relations, we'll have to wait and see. 문건영, Arirang News.
Countries around the world were waiting for the Kim-Trump summit to happen with all the potential it might have had to bring about peace. Now that it's canceled, politicians in the U.S. are taking sides over the decision, and leaders in other countries have expressed regret as well. Cha Sang-mi tells us more.
The international community was rocked by the cancellation of what would have been a historic summit. Within the United States, there were mixed responses within Congress. Most Republican lawmakers approved of President Trump's decision, with some saying the meeting would have been treacherous if it had gone ahead. House Speaker Paul Ryan said shortly after the announcement that North Korea must show more commitment to a peaceful resolution, and the maximum pressure campaign must continue. Democrats criticized President Trump for making a, quote, amateur decision that shows his lack of preparedness for the meeting. The Pentagon said it's fully prepared to respond to any provocative actions from the North. The director of the U.S. Joint Staff, Lieutenant General Kenneth McKenzie, said that if any provocations came from Pyongyang, the U.S. would work with its allies to confront them. Meanwhile, world leaders are voicing their disappointment. Singapore, which would have hosted the Kim-Trump talks, said it regrets the U.S. decision. The country's foreign ministry hoped for continued efforts to find lasting peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. Russian President Vladimir Putin said he regretted Trump's decision and claimed North Korea had been keeping its promises. In speaking at a joint press conference with Putin in St. Petersburg, French President Emmanuel Macron said he hoped the announcement would just be a small event in the bigger long-term picture. The British government said it was disappointed the summit would no longer go ahead. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Theresa May also called for the complete denuclearization on the Korean peninsula, and the UK will continue to work with its international partners until it's achieved. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres also expressed deep disappointment and urged all parties to continue dialogue for the peace and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. The Japanese government had a somewhat different stance. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga at a press conference showed understanding of the cancellation as he pledged to continue to put pressure on Pyongyang until it gives up its nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, North Korea's closest neighbor, China, is yet to respond. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
Now, it was only a matter of hours before Trump canceled the summit that North Korea demolished its nuclear test site at Punggye-ri in a gesture apparently meant to demonstrate goodwill. And reporters who were there after a trip of around 17 hours back to the North Korean city of Wonsan have been uploading footage of the demolition from their press center. Our Foreign Ministry correspondent, Lee Ji-won, who's part of South Korea's Joint Press Corps for Punggye-ri, has more.
With the journalists arriving back at the press center in Wonsan on Friday morning, video footage of the dismantling event has finally been revealed to the world. North Korea's Punggye-ri nuclear test site in the country's northeastern Hamgyeongbuk-do province became a thing of the past on Thursday. After a long, arduous journey, the reporters were taken close to the North Portal, also known as Tunnel Number 2. The reporters were briefed by the North's Nuclear Weapons Institute Deputy Chair Kang Kyung-ho on how the dismantling would take place. And at 11 a.m., the North Portal was blown up, followed by another blast, destroying an observation building near the entrance. The North Portal is where most of the North's nuclear tests had been held from the 2nd to the 6th. A second round of explosions took place at 2:17 p.m. with the west portal, known as Tunnel Number 4, being blown up. And 30 minutes later, living quarters were also brought down. The third round of explosions took place slightly past 4 in the afternoon, which destroyed the third and final tunnel, Tunnel Number 3, the south portal. And 15 minutes later, military barracks near the area were destroyed as well. Once the explosions were over, Deputy Chair Kang officially declared the test site shut.
The Democratic People's Republic of Korea's Nuclear Weapons Institute held a ceremony that completely demolished the northern nuclear test site on May 24, 2018, to transparently show our willingness to cease nuclear testing. By blowing up the tunnels, we completely blocked the entrances to them, as well as a number of security facilities and observation buildings. There were no radiation leaks, nor was there any fundamental impact on the surrounding environment.
The ceremony wrapped up at around 5 p.m. Thursday evening, and at 7 p.m. the international reporters headed back to their hotel in Wonsan. The reporters fly back to Beijing on Saturday morning. 이지원, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
So the Kim-Trump summit looks to be off for now. But where do the two sides go from here? Joining us in the studio to try and make sense of all this is Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung University. Professor, it's good to have you with us. Here. So much to talk about, but I guess we have to start from that letter that Trump wrote to Kim. It was a bizarre, some surreal letter. On one hand, sounding like a Dear John breakup letter expressing regret over pulling out of the summit, but on the other hand, they were still threatening nuclear annihilation. What do you make of this development? Why did Trump pull out of this summit?
Right, he pulled out of the June 12th Singapore meeting specifically, but the overall North Korea deal with the United States, that's something different. But if you look at it from the Trump's kind of actions so far, pulling out of something is nothing new. He pulled out of Paris Accord. He threatened to pull out NAFTA, Chorus Agreement, and NATO, and he did pull out the Iran deal as well. Yeah. Always seemingly looking for a better deal. So if it's a posturing, looking for a better deal, probably it fits within his negotiating style. But I think the worry is that there's something deeper than the mere posturing, which is that the denuclearization, the how and what, at this point, has not been clarified. So if it's really going to the substance of what the denuclearization means to both parties, probably it has not been clarified. So I think that both parties, especially on the Donald Trump side, might have thought that this is not the time to go ahead with meeting with the top meeting.
Right, but every expert and every commentator that I spoke to and I saw predicted that the Trump-Kim summit would happen, that it would go ahead despite the differences because Trump wanted it and so did North Korea. Was there any way we could have foreseen that this was going to be delayed or this was going to be cancelled like it was?
I think the indications over there, North Korea was not really cooperating with the logistics and also the terms to clarify what it means to be denuclearization and what's the benefit, economic benefit that the North Korea would be getting. Those things are up in the air, and I think the bigger part is that Donald Trump was being criticized by his constituencies that he is being dragged down by North Korea's initiatives on this. And the criticism was that he lost the big leverage by just, the promising for the security in the first place. So I think that he needs to kind of demonstrate that he does and is willing to pull out of this deal. And in fact, the letter kind of clearly demonstrated that he wants to do so.
White House officials also revealed how difficult it's been trying to work with North Korea, how they didn't respond to calls and messages, and how there was even a report a few days ago that revealed a US delegation had gone to Singapore to meet with the North Korean delegation for a scheduled meeting, but they didn't turn up. They were stood up by the North Korean delegation. It's almost understandable that the US would be frustrated with these kinds of actions. Do you think Pyongyang perhaps misplayed their hand, playing hard to get, that cost them this opportunity?
I think it's puzzling, and I think I agree with you that somebody dropped the ball in the North. Either because of their deliberate posture to play hard to get, or because they overplay their hands, miscalculating that Donald Trump really wants this, and he wouldn't pull out of this because of the domestic woes that Trump has. But if you look at it from Art of Deal, even the book clearly says that you have to really secure the options and the downside, which is the biggest weapon of pulling out or walking out of the deal. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did.
There is some sentiment that says maybe pulling out of this deal was all for the best. Maybe cancelling this was all for the best. This whole endeavour was rushed in the first place. There was simply not enough time to narrow the differences. What do you make of that sentiment?
I think that sentiment is kind of justified, because the whole premise of this deal going through, if you remember, is that they agreed on the denuclearization. Not really realizing or scrutinizing what they mean by that term to each parties. I think the differences has been slowly crystallizing, and the people realize that the gap between the two parties' interpretation of that term is pretty much wide at this point. So in that sense, they needed more time to make that happen. I think that another factor is that if the North Korea really wants to keep the nuclear power to themselves, probably they would need more time to kind of let the whole world sink in that the North Korea is a nuclear power. I think that if they don't secure that, probably they would not go ahead with this, and they'll face all the sanctions and all those difficulties going ahead. But we have seen that the North Korea puts more emphasis or more importance on securing that side of it rather than the benefit to their people.
Let's look at North Korea's response now. North Korean state media carried a statement from Kim Jong-un, the regime's first vice foreign minister, and they expressed their shock. Let me quote here. They said, "It's hard to guess the reasons." But at the same time, it was also quite surprisingly restrained and soft in their wording, complimenting Trump for his boldness in trying to have a dialogue with North Korea and saying that they still want to sit down with the US. Compared to the previous day's rhetoric, it's quite a turnaround. Were you surprised at how Pyongyang has responded?
I think it's surprising. The initial response or the reaction is that it was surprising that they were restrained to that extent. But on the other hand, the North Korea met their match. They were using this brinkmanship and bluffing methods all along, and Donald Trump is a master at that too. So I think that both parties, especially the North, realize that by escalating the bluffing or the brinkmanship, this is not going to go anywhere. So they at least needed to put it on the table that they're willing and they're eager to get this thing done.
Now, almost pushed to the sidelines was the shutdown of the Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Footage came in early this morning, showing certain explosions of the certain entrances and certain buildings being blown up. Now, Pyongyang has voluntarily offered to take this action. US didn't ask for it. They wanted to show that they were serious about their intent to denuclearize. But Trump has basically said with this cancellation of the summit that at least for now, then it doesn't mean that much. What does North Korea do now on this front? Do they carry on with their path to denuclearization?
Well, I think a lot of experts agree that this was a nice public relations kind of showing, but not much substance. The nuclear testing that they wanted to do is pretty much done. And if you look at the invitation that they have put out, no experts were invited. and nor the South Korean side either. And that test site facility has not been used for quite some time anyway. So it's nice to see that it's destroyed, but at this point, not much significance.
So both sides in their statement have left the door open for future talks. But do you think it can happen? Doesn't one side now have to concede a position of power to try and approach the other and ask for to reopen the talks? And can they ever really truly agree on the process of denuclearization?
Going back to whether what they are doing on both sides are posturing for the negotiation, it makes sense if you look at the big picture. Everybody wants this. North Korea wants this, U.S. Trump wants this, South Korea, of course, wants this. But the key, I think, is that because of their tactics of escalating and bluffing and trying to secure all kinds of leverages on both sides, the uncertainties have increased so much. And also, ever since China has pulled into this whole picture, the complexity has gone up also. So even if everybody wants this, this might not happen if not enough efforts go in to massage or rectify all those bumps and bruises. I think because of that, the willingness and the effort from the North and the U.S. and especially from South Korean government might really make the difference.
Let's talk about South Korea's government at this point. South Korean President Moon Jae-in, you've got a feel for him. It must be difficult for him right now because he was the one who instigated, who really pushed for this summit to happen, for this dialogue to happen. Where does President Moon go from here now? Does he try to involve himself again?
Well, ironically, though, the President Moon Jae-in's role is arguably bigger than ever. Ever since the date was set and the venue was set, there is a sort of a consensus that South Korean government's role has been diminished to a point where it's a crisis of the existence or the visibility. But at this point, if South Korean government or the President Moon Jae-in does not step in, probably this thing might not happen because both parties, North Korea and the U.S., is so busy trying to establish their leverages and trying to see that they acquire a good position in the negotiation. So, ironically, again, the Moon Jae-in's role at this point probably is very crucial.
Do you think he now picks up the phone, that special hotline that they've recently installed, to Kim Jong-un to try and talk to him at that point?
At this point, the detail is the matter. He can take that route or wait for the things to cool down on both sides and use kind of the beneath the surface kind of approaches to both parties. And I think it depends on the style of President Moon Jae-in, who has used all kinds of different peace gestures and kind of personal charm and the humane approach, humanistic approach to make this happen. So I think that all eyes are on what the President Moon does or not do going forward.
And briefly, just before we go, one point I do want to mention as well. President Trump, in his address yesterday, when he was talking about the cancellation, the first thing he talked about was U.S. forces were ready to take on North Korea if necessary. Now, the U.S. Defense Department has also reiterated these comments today. How concerned should we be of military action again now?
Well, we're concerned because whenever there's a threat of the fury and fire, speeches from any side will increase the likelihood that the next military action take place. But from Trump administration's side, this military option, at least, is a very important leverage in the negotiation, so they're not going to let go. Hiring Bolton on his side as a hawkish component, I think it represents the thinking that there is always a bad cop on this side, so this will keep the North Korea in check. Knowing North Korea's the history is of escalating and the bluffing and all those things, I don't know if this will make sense or make things worse. But I think that kind of rhetoric will foreseeably continue.
I feel there's so much more to talk about, but I think we'll have to end it there. Thank you for your time again, Professor, and it was always good to see you here.
My pleasure.
That concludes our show for now, but do join our later newscasts throughout the day for the latest stories and updates. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.